Thanks for coming on, everybody. My name is Kyle Makarios. I am one of the co-chairs of the Ford Task Force, also a member of the St. Paul Planning Commission, and on behalf of the entire Ford Task Force, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this evening. We'll get underway in just a minute, but before we dive into the agenda for the evening, I want to introduce City Council Member Chris Tolbert, who's going to start us off.
Thank you, Kyle, and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out. This our public meeting kind of series here has been going on for, at least this phase of it has been going on for just over a year. And we've accomplished a lot. We've covered a lot of topics. There's been a lot of work done both by staff and by task force members. I think one of the things I want to do is first of all thank the task force. They've been staffing all the tables at all these events. They've had additional meetings on top of it. So maybe if members of the task force stand up and we can give them a round of applause for all the work that they've done thus far. And I also want to thank, I know Merritt's here. If there's any other city staff that stands up, they do a lot of work behind the scenes in organizing these, and I want to thank them for all the work they've done. Merritt and maybe city staff who've worked on this, if you want to stand up. This meeting is kind of an interesting meeting because it's really going to be a recap of a lot of the work that we've done, which is helpful for some of us who forget things or have so many other things going on that it's a good reminder of what we've done. But it's also, there's still a lot of work to be done. The work that we've done has helped us vision the community, or the Ford site, helped us start setting the stage for the possible redevelopment there. But we're still not exactly where we want to be. And that's because we don't have the environmentals yet from Ford. And that's okay. Ford has been working very hard on it. And as I've said from the start, our most important part of this, at least at the beginning stage, is that we have public safety and we have a safe parcel if any development goes on it. And Ford's been working diligently to do the testing. They've been working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, but we don't quite have the results. And until we have that, a lot of the planning has been very important because we have a good vision. We've discussed a lot of the important topics, but until we know what's possible, what's not possible, how much land is there, we can't really go too many more steps forward. We're still working on a lot of things, but until that happens, and we expected originally to have some of that environmentals a few months ago, but once we have them, then we can move forward. And I always try and remind myself, we get a little antsy here. We want to get things moving. We're still paying a lot of attention to this, but this development, and because of the size, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we need to continue to remember that, because if we want a great development at the Ford site, we have to continue to think of it as a marathon and continue to diligently work over time. But I know we'll continue to do that. Thank you, task force members. Thank you, so many community members who have been so involved in this. Your ideas and thoughts have been appreciated, and I know a lot have come to this, and they've also contacted us personally. So thank you very much, and I'll be around after the meeting if anybody wants to talk. So thank you.
All right, here's what's on tap for this evening. As Councilmember Tolbert said, this is our 8th of these large public meetings we've had in the last 13 months or so. And many of you, there's many familiar faces here. Many of you have been to many of these meetings. So partly what we want to do, and at these meetings that you've come to, you've given a lot of input. We've asked a lot of questions. We've had a lot of poster boards for people to give input. So part of what we want to do tonight is to kind of let you know what we heard from you who've come to these meetings, and some of the other public stakeholders that we've engaged throughout this process, and how it shapes the planning that's moving forward. We're going to hear directly from Ford tonight and get an update on the environmental study that's going on, get an update from them. We'll get an update on the traffic study that's happening. We're going to hear about real estate analysis on the Ford site and feasibility for different types of development there. And then we're going to shift gears and start looking forward and kind of lay out what we're thinking is our plan for doing zoning and coming up with a public realm plan over the next months, right? So that, and then we will be able to, a lot of the public input we've gathered is encapsulated on the large poster boards that many of you have seen in the back of the room, so we'll have time after the meeting to have discussion and take a look at those as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the lead city staff, city planner on this project, Merritt Clapp Smith, who's going to run us through what we heard this year.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. We want to take a little time to reflect back what we heard over this past year from input, because this input is very valuable to us. So I will just spend about 10 or 15 minutes sharing with you kind of the key messages and why it matters. So first of all, we've had public outreach ever since the Ford planning started in 2007. And sort of pre this public engagement round, pre-2014, we had about 174 people, different people that signed up for meetings, attended things. Since this past year in our meetings, we have had 439 unique names added to that original 174 people. So every time you sign in, we appreciate that. It just kind of helps us keep track how many people are coming for the first time, how many people come to every meeting, how effective are we being at reaching people. So 613 people so far have been coming to meetings during this time period, and we really appreciate that. We have a big email list. A lot of you hopefully hear about the meetings from that, over 2,500 people. And in addition to these kind of meetings, which are more traditional format, we've tried to bring some meetings out to people with a pop-up popsicle truck this summer, doing some focus groups with people closer within their communities, and we're always looking for more voices. So if you have any ideas about how we can reach more people, we appreciate hearing them. So who is the public? People like to say a lot, well, what does the public think? Like the public is a large single voice and they all have the same opinion, which we know is not true. The public, their neighbors, their business people, community members, stakeholders, prospective tenants of the site. I've been hearing a lot from people that want to be on the site in the future, and they're saying, what do I want to be there so that I'll move there? So we've heard a lot of different opinions, and some of them are contrast with one another, but there are some common themes, and that's what we've tried to pull out to share with you tonight and to reflect on the boards in the back. So I'm going to break them down into 5 or 6 topic areas here, what we heard. The first on parks and open space. People love the idea of reintroducing a creek feature to the site. So, you have to take your stormwater and you have to treat it and manage it anyway. Turn that into a feature that's on the surface, that's attractive. It's an amenity. Very popular idea. People really want gathering places on the site where they can get together, like a civic square, a park, and there can be markets, or there might be music or art or something. Strong interest. They want vegetation on the site to be natural, so not really formal plantings, but more fitting, I think, probably with the context of the river valley. And then we heard about recreation that meets the needs of kind of all different ages. So don't just think about the young people, think about everybody. So pickleball, which is in this bottom picture, is something that came up, and I hear it's a growing sport. I don't play pickleball, but I see some nods.
You will.
I will. I admit, yeah, I'm aging. I think young people play pickleball too. But. All right, bikes, pedestrians, and transit. Again, people really like the idea that this site does well, providing for all of those modes. So it's not just about right-of-way for cars, but we help all of these things coexist on the site. The big theme we heard is, in order to do that well, you really need to try to separate these uses. People don't feel comfortable when they're on the sidewalk and a bike goes by, or when a bicycle's on the road, they don't feel safe, either if they're a driver or a bicyclist. So try to separate these spaces, providing well-connected transit, and have good shelters, that you're standing out waiting for a bus and you're not getting rained on. And then balancing all those needs on the site. Streets, parking, and traffic. So you'll hear more about the traffic study tonight. Traffic's obviously a hot and sensitive topic for this site and for the neighborhood. So the first message is, people seem to like the ideas that we shouldn't design a site or allow a site to be developed that encourages lots and lots of cars. The cars are here and you have to accommodate them, but don't encourage them. So trying to balance the design for how you allow cars on the site without making it so easy for cars that everybody's driving there and driving around. So designing streets to kind of calm traffic, trying to direct traffic to the larger streets in the area. So as we're looking for connections, don't direct all your traffic north onto a street that's not designed for traffic. That's just a little neighborhood street. So you have to be conscientious about the street design. And then provide parking in structured ramps. There was not a lot of interest in large surface parking lots. People like the idea of the structured ramps, still have some on-street parking, parking in alleys. When we asked who should pay for the ramps, it was kind of split. People are like public, private, both. So not a clear message on who pays, and parking is very expensive to provide in any form. Water, waste, art, and greenery, kind of our grab bag meeting that we had. So we talked a lot about stormwater treatment. There was quite a bit of information on that, so that relates back to this idea of treating stormwater at a surface, making an amenity. And the most popular element of that is connecting it down to Hidden Falls. So maybe in the future, Hidden Falls, instead of just being a pipe that comes out and starts the falls, it would actually come over the top of the falls in a stream feature, and that would be the end point of the stormwater collection on the site. Providing art that is interactive and community-based, have it reflect history, nature, water. So don't just put up an art piece that sort of stands there and people look at it, but have more fun, make it something that people can feel like they're a part of. Again, the focus on natural plantings, and on the sort of waste topic, that was not a really exciting input feature for people. They mostly said make recycling convenient. So we did something interesting on the housing. We know that people have pretty strong preferences about types of housing they like and don't like. And one thing we asked, if any of you were here, is we showed images of different types of housing that was low density, medium density, and high density. And we asked people to say what their favorite image was of each. And people did that, but sometimes anything that was higher density, some people just didn't want to vote at all because they don't want really tall buildings. So one of the messages was it may be okay to have some, attached structures, more density in housing, but people really did not like the idea of tall, high-rise buildings as a way to meet housing needs. Strong interest in a mix of housing options for different ages, points you are in your lifestyle, incomes, and having enough people on the site that you can support services and services and amenities. Meeting affordable housing needs, particularly for seniors and families. And then design buildings in a way that it respects the context of the neighborhood. So don't have it be completely different or have it all be modern. Mix in traditional forms so there's sort of a transition that fits within the neighborhood. Jobs and employment. There was good support for bringing employment and jobs to the site. We'll talk about some of the job strategies which were mentioned at that meeting that people seemed to feel comfortable with. It's not imagining sort of low-slung, light industrial warehousing, anything like that, and there wasn't support for that, but providing a diverse mix of jobs, maybe some of these newer co-op workspaces that people are in, trying to have retail jobs and services that meet neighborhood needs. No interest really in big box. And this is going to be a challenge when the site redevelops, because often developers need to lead with a large, well-financed anchor in order to get the other retail and services to fall into place. And so the big box is often the go-to that meets that first anchor to land the retail deal. So this will be a tough policy and development discussion. So how will the input be used? Trying to see the forest through the trees. We have been using the input to refine priorities for the site. There were new ideas that were suggested that staff hadn't thought of or hadn't been mentioned before that have been helpful and have had us think about things in new ways. It helps us understand what sensitivities and concerns there are so that we can really think about how do we address those. or how do we change things so that we can reduce those concerns. And the information really informs policymakers and also the market. So by feeding all this input back, which we've done by posting input from the meetings on the website, and we'll post these posters, the whole market, the policymakers, everybody begins to understand the temperament of the community and what it's feeling as a positive development, and that will really help shape and build confidence in the market about what it's appropriate to do here. So in the next one, we'll talk about these studies from 2015. So as you know, we've had a number of studies going on this year, working with consultants and organizations. And one was the job strategy study. And we shared this at the meeting on jobs and housing. So that group got together, tried to figure out what are the amenities of the site, what are the constraints, such as you can't have jobs and employment based on a lot of trucking or transportation at the site, it would never work. You need to have a good urban fabric, so you don't want sort of, as I mentioned before, a large warehouse building, things like that. What kind of jobs do you want to offer good employment opportunities? So the recommended industries for the Ford site are up here. Health and medical, research and development, sort of small volume, custom manufacturing, education, office, and retail and services, which will happen naturally. The ones above it, some employers might naturally find their way to the site, or the broker, master developer will court them, but we think that the city and some of our other partners can play a role in helping to seek out employers and businesses that are a good fit for the site, that will provide the jobs and the economic base that's going to be important there. Okay, the other second study we had going on was an energy system study for the site. This is just wrapping up now. The McKnight Foundation was very generous in assisting the city with funding to support this study, and we hired a consultant team of Ramboll Energy, which is based in Copenhagen. And they worked with a technical advisory group looking at different technologies you could use for energy at the site. And through different analysis, they put together sort of three main concepts of how you could deliver energy to the site. And then they did a financial analysis of what it would take to do that. They looked at the standard grid system, district heating and cooling, and a system based more on individual building solutions like solar. So that report is going to be being finalized in December. We're going to post it on the website, probably send out a notice to everybody. We're going to try to create a very easy to read executive summary for people that don't want to read the whole report. It's a lot of very technical information. But I just want to read, there are some words up here for people who can't read it. I do want to read one of the conclusion statements from the report that sort of sums up the findings of this group. Creating a sustainable and livable community requires looking at the bigger picture, creating livable space, supporting sustainable energy design, building energy efficient structures, and revisiting conventional water infrastructure and transportation. So the study also looked at building energy and transportation energy. What's important to note is these alternative energy systems are likely to cost more at the front end to the utility provider, but they create greater efficiency and a better return on investment over time. So it's a different approach, and it would require a different approach to financing by the provider, the utility provider. And finally, the findings from the stormwater study. Phase 1, spring, summer 2015, they looked at how much space would be required to treat stormwater at the site, assuming a certain volume of development. They looked at how you protect the creek downtown from downstream from erosion from rain events. They looked at sort of typical stormwater treatment, and they put together these initial renderings, which we shared at the public meeting on stormwater, that seemed to create a lot of interest from people. And then over the fall and wrapping up this winter, the consultant is preparing cost estimates of sort of a typical treatment of stormwater to this system approach on the site, the comprehensive approach. They're looking at benefits besides costs and benefits that are non-monetary, like social and environmental, and they're looking at the capital and maintenance costs. So we will understand how much land does it take to treat stormwater, what are the costs with a typical approach versus a centralized network approach, and that's going to be really important and valuable information. So initial outcomes, a good finding is that in a comprehensive approach, you create economies of scale that may ultimately make it cheaper to treat stormwater in doing a central network than when everybody's having to treat it individually on their site. So instead of having to create all their little mini stormwater treatments on lot by lot, if they can just pipe it to a central treatment system, this may be cheaper overall. Protecting Hidden Falls from the storm surge erosion that happens downstream when we get large storm events does take several acres of land. That's why you see that sort of larger stormwater element right above Hidden Falls. So this shows some of the features, the ideas that were tested. It moves from north to south with more urban-looking stormwater treatment, then kind of incorporating it into a civic square, and then being more natural at the south end. So that was where we're at in the stormwater study, and now we're going to pivot to looking ahead. Now that we've wrapped up 2015, what's coming next? And to start us off, we will have Mike Hogan representing Ford to tell us what Ford has been up to. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Mike Hogan. I'm the site manager at the Ford property. I've been fortunate enough to be at the facility, the Twin Cities Assembly Plant, for 18 and a half years. When the plant was operating, I was the plant controller, and I was lucky enough to get the site manager job when we segued into the decommissioning phase of the plant's existence here. And as you see from this is the slide I'm going to speak to tonight. I think what it tells us is we've come a long way. That's looking south, of course, on our neighbor's roof, the high rise to the north, so looking directly south. We're proud of the fact that we've got some nice vegetation growing on the site. That makes us and the Capital Region's watershed very happy because we're protecting the river. We had 2 million square foot of factory on that upper property, that 122 acre parcel that's on top of the bluff, if you will. As you can see, all those structures are gone. The slabs that were underneath those structures are largely gone. We're leaving some of those parking lots in place, moving into the redevelopment. But one feature that's of interest in the kind of left middle of the side, for those that you've peeked through the fabric, you see a big pile of what we call Class 5. That is formerly the slabs of the factory and the foundations. We had a great agreement. It was beneficial to everyone, and that's why it's called such a beneficial use designation with the MPCA, where we were able to recycle. It's turned out to be about 300 million pounds of concrete, and that's good for everyone. We didn't send truck trips over the road. We saved landfill space. We've used that for fill on the site to the extent that our plan is not to have to import any fill material. And that's just a winner all around, of course. So we've been very pleased with the progress. We've been worked hand in hand with our neighbors. And I think it's been a winner, worked with the city and the MPCA. And Councilperson Tolbert mentioned, they've been eager for some environmental results, and Ford has been eager to provide them, but we've been very thorough. We took over 1,000 soil borings on that upper property and more down on the river parcel as well. But I've been given information from our Environmental Quality Office that this month we're going to provide the MPCA with a draft environmental study that they will then work with all of us on next steps. And that'll provide the information that the city needs to move forward with zoning. It'll allow Ford to move forward with remediation plans. In this picture, for instance, you see some white dots. Those are soil covered in poly. Those are impacted pockets, if you will, on the property. We know we're going to deal with that, those areas, and there are a few more, and that's the information that will be shared with the MPCA and eventually everyone. That becomes public information when Ford submits that. So we're happy that we are moving that process forward, and believe me, Ford is as eager as the city to move to the sale and the redevelopment phase, and I know all of you are as well. So we're committed to that. Most of you that know the property see on the right side the steam plant stack. You can see the top of that building. Just to reiterate, those buildings on the river will remain. We're going to keep them there for repurposing as it's called. And of course, the hydro facility that's off the picture was formerly a Ford asset. That's now Brookfield Energy, and that will run in perpetuity as far as Brookfield is concerned. So those buildings will stay in place. The upper site is as you see it, and we look forward to moving things forward with our partners with the city and the state and the county, and we hope that to keep everyone pleased with the progress. Thank you.
So I'll mention that this report that Mike mentioned that will be submitted to the MPCA, these reports are very long and they're very technical. We have a professional help us interpret what's in these reports. So as soon as they're public, they've been submitted to the PCA, we post them on our website, but there are very few people that know how to read them. So we would like to try to put together a meeting with Ford and the PCA after the results are public, that people would be invited to, where professionals will explain in layperson terms what this whole report says. So that will be one of the meetings we have coming up as a yet to be determined date. So next up, we have Steve Wilson from SRF to talk about a traffic study.
Good evening and thanks for coming out. As Merritt said, as the slide says, my name's Steve Wilson. I'm with SRF Consulting. We are working with the city on this phase of the Ford site study on the transportation planning and the transportation overview. We are partnered for this part of the study with a firm from Nelson Nygaard, which is out of Boston, national firms, worked on a lot of mixed-use sites and very many, I'll say, non-standard types of development. And when we knew this study was coming out, they were the first people that I thought of saying, we should be working with these because they know this kind of, they know what needs to go into this kind of creative process. SRF is locally based. We have been around in Twin Cities for about 55 years, I think, and work throughout generally the Midwest, but a few things outside of that. Our role in this study is to, while Nelson Nygaard will be doing some of the bigger picture planning, we'll be doing a lot of the technical analysis in terms of the traffic study itself, the estimating of how many of the trips would be on transit, where are they going, what roadways, what's the impact on those roadways, how much is too much in terms of development, and what happens if you have different access points, all kinds of things I'll get into a bit. So we're kind of the traffic numbers people on this. And our third partner for this is Utile. They are land use and design, and they'll be providing us some feedback in terms of, what might we be able to do with certain land use configurations to make things more efficient. The transportation piece is very critical to this project, and what we're trying to do is establish there are really 4 principles, and Merritt's kind of touched on them. One of the things that we're trying to do is provide connections, and we're trying to allow people to have the activities that they want to do within their lives. So connecting the neighborhood to the Mississippi River, that's a very important kind of principle that's been established. How can we do that? How much access? How can we safely do that in terms of providing ped and bike access across the river and accommodating traffic needs and the peds and bikes that are out there now. Expanding the living and the working opportunities for the neighborhoods and the environments. Again, we're here because we are living and we have activities that we want to do that make our lives happen. And so the transportation system allows us to get from here to there to do those activities. How do we do them safely? How do we do them efficiently is an important thing. Multiple connections. and we'll get into this a little bit later, the more connectivity you can provide, the better, the easier it is to kind of disperse people's movements. It keeps traffic from bunching up because there are alternate routes. It keeps people from all being on one mode because they have mode options. It just helps make a more efficient design and a safer design, ultimately. And then finally, the access, we want to have it accessible for everyone, and we want to provide a lot of different options that are well, the way people want to travel now and into the future: ped, bike, transit, and the automobile. So at this point in the study, what we're really doing, we're working on our piece, but we're also kind of working in context with a lot of these other things. And the ones that I'd focus on in terms of what the background is, the real estate is going to be very important, because that's going to drive to some extent what kind of land uses are there, and maybe where those land uses are going to be. So the land uses are going to say we have a certain kind of activity. It's a work activity, it's a shopping activity, it's a recreational activity. Those activities mean people are coming to the site or they're going from the site. So that interaction that we would have for that phase is very important. Another that's very important would be, well, looking at the fourth bullet line, the last few bullet lines, the A line is coming into play. What's that going to do in terms of people's desire and connectivity with transit? We have the bike network. The plan has been developed and in the process of being implemented. How do we connect our site and work with that planning effort? Riverview Corridor is underway and continuing, and that's going to go on longer than our particular phase. But we want to work with and accommodate and see what can we do to help each other with that one, and a lot of different things. I mean, transportation touches a lot of different phases of this study. So, the first thing is we need to do, and we'll touch on this a little bit, we want to understand how the travel is going to work on the site and within the site for people getting around the area, and also the external relationship to the outside world. And that's, as I said, the surrounding transportation system, some of which is in place, some of which starts up this spring, the A line, and things moving forward. So how do we make that connection the right connection so it minimizes the impacts on the outside areas while providing the right level of safe connectivity. One of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that the overall program and development program and the layout of the site are things that have the right kind of balance. If you want to put the land uses that are very transit-oriented land uses near the transit services, you want to get the ones that don't need to be near other modes, you can put them in other places. And how do you balance that with the real estate system and the desires of the marketplace? So all of those different things are, at this point in the study, things that we need to kind of look at and relate to other phases of the study, of the land uses that we might be looking at. And again, with the community as well. So connectivity is something I've mentioned before, mentioned again. On your left was kind of now the conventional way of having a neighborhood layout, in the suburban area. And actually, the Ford site area, or the Highland neighborhood, if you go to the south, you see a little bit more of the conventional type of layout in the newer Highland area. And if you go to the north, you have the traditional grid layout for the most part. So in the conventional, the new way of doing it, what we're calling the conventional way, there are few access points. We're really concentrating activities on certain nodes. That means a few places have a lot of traffic. If a traffic jam occurs, you're kind of stuck there. There's really only one way to go, and it really focuses people. Under what the more traditional way of doing it, a grid system like a downtown, there are lots of different ways to get around. And if you think of traffic like water, it kind of filters and spreads, finds its way out, doesn't get too crowded because there's always options, and we can kind of work within that kind of context. And so that's how we're going to be looking at the internal structure of of the site, and and what can we do to positively affect the accessibility within and managing the impacts and traffic flows. So this particular illustration kind of looks at the relationship of land uses in the site. So if you look at a mixed-use development, you're going to try and have a balance of housing activities, so where people work, office activities, or some other workplace activities, but generally office in a mixed use. So that's where they work. So people live, they work, and restaurants are kind of a representation of, well, where they play, which may include eating, entertainment, playing pickleball, things like that. So if you have a development that has those things, that improves the chance that people are going to be able to do a lot of their activities within an area, and which lets them do it with walking and biking and transit much more readily than going out into the onto the roadway system. So I can walk to work. Even if I drive to work, I don't have to get in my car and drive to go have lunch. I can walk and do that. The other thing about the complementary land uses like this is it shares parking. I use the parking at night from my apartment. My coworkers in the office can backfill, or they can use parking during the day, and at night that's when the restaurants and movie theaters need the parking. So it's an ability to be more efficient with how the land is used and lessens that kind of parking impact. And so there are different design elements within the transportation realm that we're going to be looking at. First one, entries. How do we relate to the external world? How do we get into the site? And you have certain areas where we want to be guiding the vehicles, and other areas where keep the vehicles off so that the pedestrians and bicycles can have more access. So how do you do the entries? How do you connect to the transit system? You want to do it in the area, in the way that the people who are walking around can have that convenient access to transit? Because this is not an area where we would envision any park and ride lots or anything like this. People will be walking up to the A line or to the other bus routes that are on, or if the Riverview corridor comes through and it makes that connection, you would have a connectivity to the Riverview. Circulation is important within the site to keep people from getting lost and driving around more than they need to or want to, because that actually is a cause of congestion. So signing and marketing. The signing and marking, in terms of how do you get people where they want to be and where they need to be. And as I said, the shared parking, the parking management is also a very important component of this traffic piece. Get the cars into the site and into the parking areas. Don't have them driving all over where they might, be interfering with the pedestrians and cyclists. So here's the context of the Ford site. It's big. Well, you've probably seen a million pictures of it. And I grew up about 2 inches off the bottom of that for a little while, and then about 5 inches off the top of it. So I'm very familiar with the Ford site, and it is exciting to be able to work on something that's literally your backyard. I live off the upper corner right now, but in St. Paul. So we have done a little bit of work as best we can without having a real firm land use and knowing, kind of awaiting for the results of the Ford study. But in what I do, we kind of model future conditions. We have some survey data, we have some other sources of information, and we try and say, well, if you had X thousands of people living on the site or jobs on the site, where might they be working? Where might they be living? How much could you expect to stay on the site? And so this is kind of at a generic level right now, kind of the way the world lays out. We know that not everybody's going to live and work and do everything on the Ford site. That's not the way the world operates. But maybe we can capture some of that and help reduce. We also know from some of the data that's out there that not everybody's headed into downtown Minneapolis or to downtown St. Paul, and not everybody's which are good transit markets, right? So you kind of want those markets to be there, and we know we'll capture a good chunk of the ridership of that travel market that's going to downtown Minneapolis. We know they're going to be on transit because that's a good transit market. I-94, not such a good transit market at this point, but evolving with a Riverview connection and a Blue Line connection, that the South Loop area in Bloomington is getting better. But that's a lot of automobile territory. So we know there's traffic, but we don't think everybody's going to be working down in Bloomington. So we know it's kind of evenly distributed to some of the major areas. Eagan and Mendota Heights, a lot of them jobs out there, and people in the Highland Park area who live in the Highland Park area go to work out in some of those areas. But a lot of that traffic, that purple area in the middle, I think about a third of the people who might be coming to or leaving this Ford site could be going, either living in the Mac Groveland Highland areas or going to work in the Mac Groveland Highland areas. And I was kind of thinking, gee, that's a big no. There's an awful lot of people who work at St. Thomas, University of St. Thomas, St. Kate's, McAllister. There are a lot of work destinations within the context of where we are, the industrial areas down along Shepherd Road and West and Fort Road. So there are job opportunities, and there are housing opportunities where people who live in that neighborhood could be working in there. So having a third of the traffic from this site says good things about the opportunity to do transit and pedestrian and bike and cycling. So we're we got this going, but we're waiting for land uses, as we said. So one of the other things that we do in our work is we look at, okay, given that people are living and working and playing in different places, what's that going to do after we get people on transit and ped and bike? Well, so people are going to be traveling in certain directions. And so at this point, we're kind of seeing what looks to be a balance among all the different directions. The Ford site is very centrally located. So that means we're not going to have everybody heading in one direction. It looks like things will separate out pretty well. So we'll be able to take that into account. So in terms of a lot of the technical analysis, that's kind of where we are. So the existing and proposed bike network the city's been working on provides a lot of that kind of connectivity. We got that taken into account. Transit system, I've mentioned that several times. And transit ridership is also, we know where the bus riders are. Some of these information we have at the back table. We can talk about that afterwards. The road network, we know where the hot spots are, and we know where people are and what kind of travel are on there. We also know that traffic really hasn't been growing much in this corridor over the last decade or so, a couple of decades, in fact. So we know from the traffic data, there's not a lot of background growth in this area. You see a little bit of a wiggle up in that upper left-hand corner, right on Ford Parkway. The Ford plant closed. You lose some traffic. One of our initial observations is Ford Parkway in Cleveland, major points of connectivity that we're going to have and see some access opportunities to connect from our site to either Cleveland and Ford Parkway. So the question is where, how much, and access into and through the site. We've already noted that the intersection of Cleveland and St. Paul needs some work now and in the future. Also, certainly, we can make things work more efficiently. We also see an opportunity to improve the connection down at Montreal to work that area better and guide traffic in that direction. And as I said, Ford Parkway in Cleveland, yes, that's obviously a problem for a lot of reasons. So maybe there's a connectivity thing that we can do through there to help relieve the condition at Ford Parkway in Cleveland. We know that we have a unique opportunity with the Riverview corridor coming up through the Ford Spur, and we'll be looking at that. So is it a transit way? Is it roadway? Probably more likely, if it is anything, some kind of transit way is something they're looking at. We know, as we pull everything in for the different land use plans, that if you have a more dense activities, that you are likely to generate fewer trips. As you see, the very low density at the left end of that graph, high trips, and fewer as you get to more density. So, which also affects parking and the ability to use non-automobile things. So these are all things that we work into the modeling that we're doing. And basically the way we do it, and this is my wrap up here. So we know people take trips, they have activities, we know they pick different modes, and we know that they go to different places, and they all have to make that decision-making process. And they take different routes to get there. This is a fairly standardized process, and so we kind of make it work for the St. Paul area, for the Twin Cities area, and specifically for the Ford plant site. And we kind of pull everything together as we go through the different land uses and the different combinations of land uses and the different roadway configurations. And we kind of work them through a modeling process to kind of come to something that will be a good balance that we are looking for in terms of, supporting the city's development plan and the task force development plan and land use plans. And that wraps me up. So I will be back at the table afterwards and answer questions. I know we're just at the beginning of this. We'll have more once we get into the land use and the analysis, and that will be the more fun stuff.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Sage Martinson. I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the City of St. Paul. And I'm going to mention briefly one of the other next steps that we're doing, which is a real estate and development analysis for the site. So this is one of the additional pieces that will help us take the community input that we've gotten from the priorities to the more specific input of this last year and think about what's the market feasibility and how does that impact then our master plan for the site. So to do that activity, the city has hired a national developer, Perry Rose, which is a national developer that's known for infill, sustainable urban development. And they do development across the country. They also do development consulting across the country. And Chuck Perry is here somewhere nearby. Chuck is working with us. I'll go closer to the microphone here, see if that helps. Sorry. Chuck is working with us on this piece of the work, this real estate development analysis. And the basic components here is looking at the pros and cons of the priorities that we started with, the sort of more fine-grained priorities that came out of the community process. How do we weigh those against each other? Which are more feasible than others in the development? What are the redevelopment opportunities and what are just the development feasibility? And then finally, to do a financial analysis, to really look at what's possible from a developer's viewpoint and what can be built there or not. So in doing this work, Perry Rose is going to be working with a number of consultants that will help do pieces of the work. Oh, there I go. One piece of that is a market study. So Perry Rose is going to be working with Maxfield Research and Consulting, which is a local market research firm. Does a lot of development, market research. They're going to be looking at growth projections for the area, for the neighborhood, market conditions for a variety of uses, and help us think about how quickly will a site like the Ford plant with 150 some plus acres, how quickly will it develop? How many years will that take? And then what are some of the projected values? So that'll be a component of this work. Another component of the work as you look at real estate development capacity and feasibility for a site is what does it cost to build new infrastructure? As we saw in the picture, there is no infrastructure currently on the site, so there will be new infrastructure that will need to be built as the site builds out. And SRF is going to also be working with Perry Rose, trying to estimate what some of those infrastructure costs might be in different development scenarios. Everything from the streets and bike paths to sewers, et cetera. So taking a full look at that infrastructure cost. And then all of this information essentially will feed into the market and real estate development analysis. And it will look at what a developer would look at. What are the costs of building this scenario? What are the revenues that could be generated? And will help us determine sort of the mix of uses on the site, which are more financially feasible than others. What capacity does the region have for building X square foot of commercial, for example, versus number of housing units. So all of this information will be fed into this financial analysis, which will help us take essentially the input and right size it so it's both aspirational and based in what the real estate development market can do as we develop the zoning and master plan for the site. So we know the future of the Ford site is dependent on a couple of really important things. It's dependent on what Ford finds from this environmental investigation that it's doing now. It's dependent on the decisions Ford will make about going to market. It's also very dependent on the kind of zoning and master plan that we as the city decide to attach to this site. So all of those things in combination will determine what's possible there, and we want to make sure that that zoning and master planning that we're doing is both really aspirational, but also understands the market context in which it's being built. So like the traffic study, this piece is just beginning, and so it's sort of entering into this next phase of the work, and there'll be more information as this part of the project progresses and we start to get results. And it will certainly inform the draft master plan that we'll be doing in the next phase.
Okay, I have good news. We are 5 slides from the end. This will hardly take any time. I can see some of our younger citizens up front. Their eyes are glued to the screen. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but we are almost at the end. So we just want to outline the important part of this next step. We've been talking about how we're going to do the zoning and public realm plan. People say, well, what does that mean and what's in it? So I'm going to take a slide to tell kind of the key principles we're going to put into each one that'll be the foundation. So you've heard it's going to be a mixed-use site. So when we do the zoning, we can define what sort of uses are allowed on the site. But we can also, in a master plan, there's flexibility if you allow a mix of uses, but we can also bookend, we want a range of this many square feet of retail between this and this. And you can put that in the master plan. So you can provide some flexibility in where things go on the site that can respond to the market, but kind of have a high and low end. We don't want more than this or less than this, because the right kind of mix is what will make the site successful. We will allow, or may allow, somewhat higher density than the surrounding neighborhood. So if you think of Highland, it's one of our lower density neighborhoods in the city of St. Paul because it's predominantly single family, and at the site we'll be looking at a range of residential densities. We want to tier heights up as we move away from the river, so no intention of putting a row of tall towers along the river. We'd start lower and allow higher heights as you move away. We do expect that there may be some land use limitations put on the site by Ford in response to areas of the site that may have more impacted soils. They have not said that yet, but just to be safe, we're kind of expecting that may be the case. We will obviously be finding out more in the months ahead as Ford comes forward with their environmental. There will be sustainable design features embedded. We need to balance city, community, market interests, and respect the context and tradition of the area while allowing some new forms. So those are our general principles. And these have been helped, I think we've helped kind of reinforce or refine these based on this past year of meetings. So key principles for public realm: strongly support walking, biking, transit, accommodate cars, don't encourage them, which I mentioned. Connecting streets, as Steve said, so we try to disperse traffic as much as possible and not channel it to congestion points. Acknowledge the limits of road capacity. We need to make sure that we're not allowing zoning and development that would just gridlock the neighborhood, which is why the traffic study is going to be so important. We want to limit the road connections, though, to Mississippi River Boulevard. So, that's a special kind of place along the river, and so our traffic solution isn't going to be to move everybody on and off the site along the river. Want to provide a mix of park and open space experiences and ideas that came up a lot: the Civic Square, neighborhood park, recreation. And then overlap and connect trails, open space, and stormwater. So take our spaces and blend them together so they're sort of more than, the sum of the whole is more than the parts separately. So technically, what is a zoning plan? It starts out saying these general principles and characters, and then the zoning says, we have different types of districts across the site, and they have uses that are allowed within those areas of the site. There are standards for those. So we talk about building types and forms that are allowed. What do the streets, sidewalk, bike lanes, vegetation look like? What are the standards? What do the parks and open space look like generally? Where will they be? How will the stormwater move through the site? Where will the utilities go? And general design and sustainability. So there is a lot that goes in zoning. So when people ask, well, what can the city really do? Well, with the zoning, you can do a lot, but it's a tool that we want to use widely so that the site can be, wisely, so the site can be successful, but this is the opportunity to really advance the principles and priorities of the city and the community. And then it will have a phasing plan to sort of say where do we expect the site to develop, where it starts, how it will move through. So as wrap up, we have upcoming meetings. We are scheduling 3 task force meetings in December and January. These meetings will be open to the public, but the format, if any of you were with us in the early planning, is the task force gets together and discusses things. So they're going to be reviewing all of this input over the past year, city priorities, and discussing them and considering recommendations they would want to make to the city. We will give more information on each. They'll cover different topics and announce the location later. Environmental update, hopefully soon. And finally, we hope that we're coming forward with a draft zoning and public realm plan in the spring for public meetings and discussion. So that's what we have coming up. So stay tuned, and thank you very much.